O'Fallon, Missouri. Chapter 4, Part 2 of Fox's Book of Martyrs, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sean F. Sawyers. Fox's Book of Martyrs, Volume 1, by John Fox. Edited by William Byron Forbush. Chapter 4, Papal Persecutions, Part 2. Persecutions of the Albigenses. The Albigenses were a people of the Reformed religion who inhabited the country of Albi. They were condemned on the score of religion in the Council of Lateran by order of Pope Alexander III. Nevertheless, they increased so prodigiously that many cities were inhabited by persons only of their persuasion, and several eminent noblemen embraced their doctrines. Among the latter were Raymond, Earl of Toulouse, Raymond, Earl of Foix, the Earl of Beziers, etc. A friar named Peter, having been murdered in the dominions of the Earl of Toulouse, the Pope made the murder a pretense to persecute that nobleman and his subjects. To effect this, he sent persons throughout all Europe in order to raise forces to act coercively against the Albigenses, and promised paradise to all that would come to this war, which he termed a holy war, and bear arms for 40 days. The same indulgences were likewise held out to all who entered themselves for the purpose as to such as engaged in crusades to the Holy Land. The brave Earl defended Toulouse and other places with the most heroic bravery and various success against the Pope's legates and Simon, Earl of Montfort, a bigoted Catholic nobleman. Unable to subdue the Earl of Toulouse openly, the King of France and the Queen Mother and 3 archbishops raised another formidable army, and had the art to persuade the Earl of Toulouse to come to a conference, when he was treacherously seized upon, made a prisoner, forced to appear barefooted and bareheaded before his enemies, and compelled to subscribe an abject recantation. This was followed by a severe persecution against the Albigenses, and express orders that the laity should not be permitted to read the sacred scriptures. In the year 1620 also, the persecution against the Albigenses was very severe. In 1648, a heavy persecution raged throughout Lithuania and Poland. The cruelty of the Cossacks was so excessive that the Tartans themselves were ashamed of their barbarities. Among others who suffered was the Reverend Adrian Cholinsky, who was roasted alive by a slow fire, and whose sufferings and mode of death may depict the horrors which the professors of Christianity have endured from the enemies of the Redeemer. The reformation of papistical error very early was projected in France. For in the 3rd century a learned man named Almericus and 6 of his disciples were ordered to be burnt at Paris for asserting that God was no otherwise present in the sacramental bread than in any other bread, that it was idolatry to build altars or shrines to saints, and that it was ridiculous to offer incense to them. The martyrdom of Almericus and his pupils did not, however, prevent many from acknowledging the justness of his notions, and seeing the purity of the Reformed religion, so that the faith of Christ continually increased, and in time not only spread itself over many parts of France, but diffused the light of the gospel over various other countries. In the year 1524, at a town in France called Meldon, one John Clark set up a bill on the church door, wherein he called the Pope Antichrist. For this offense he was repeatedly whipped, and then branded on the forehead. Going afterward to Mentz in Lorraine, he demolished some images for which he had his right hand and nose cut off, and his arms and breast torn with pincers. He sustained these cruelties with amazing fortitude, and was even sufficiently cool to sing the 115th Psalm, which expressly forbids idolatry, after which he was thrown into the fire and burnt to ashes. Many persons of the Reformed persuasion were, about this time, beaten, racked, scourged, and burnt to death, in several parts of France, but more particularly at Paris, Malda, and Limousin. A native of Malta was burnt by a slow fire for saying that Mass was a plain denial of the death and passion of Christ. At Limousin, John de Cardurco, a clergyman of the Reformed religion, was apprehended and ordered to be burnt. Francis Brabard, secretary to Cardinal de Palais, for speaking in favor of the Reformed, had his tongue cut out, and was then burnt. A.D. 1545. James Cobard, a schoolmaster in the city of St. Michael, was burnt, A.D. 1545, for saying that, quote, the Mass was useless and absurd. And about the same time 14 men were burnt at Malda, their wives being compelled to stand by and behold the execution. A.D. 1546, Peter Chapot brought a number of Bibles in the French tongue to France, and publicly sold them there, for which he was brought to trial, sentenced, and executed a few days afterwards. Soon after, a cripple of Meaux, a schoolmaster of Farras, named Stephen Paulat, and a man named John English were burnt for the faith. Monsieur Blondel, a rich jeweler, was, in A.D. 1548, apprehended at Lyons and sent to Paris. There he was burnt for the faith by order of the court, A.D. 1549. Herbert, a youth of 19 years of age, was committed to the flames at Dijon, as was also Florent Venot in the same year. In the year 1554, 2 men of the Reformed religion, with the son and daughter of one of them, were apprehended and committed to the castle of Nevers. On examination, they confessed their faith and were ordered to execution. Being smeared with grease, brimstone, and gunpowder, they cried, salt on this sinful and rotten flesh. Their tongues were then cut out, and they were afterward committed to the flames, which soon consumed them, by means of the combustible matter with which they were besmeared. The Bartholomew Massacre at Paris, etc. On the 22nd day of August, 1572, commenced this diabolical act of sanguinary brutality. It was intended to destroy at one stroke the root of the Protestant tree, which had only before partially suffered in its branches. The King of France had artfully proposed a marriage between his sister and the Prince of Navarre, the captain and prince of the Protestants. This imprudent marriage was publicly celebrated at Paris, August 18, by the Cardinal of Bourbon upon a high stage erected for the purpose. They dined in great pomp with the bishop, and supped with the king at Paris. 4 days after this, the prince, Coligny, as he was coming from the council, was shot in both arms. He then said to Mar, his deceased mother's minister, O my brother, I do now perceive that I am indeed beloved of my God, since for his most holy sake I am wounded. Although the vidame advised him to fly, yet he abode in Paris, and was soon after slain by Bemgis, who afterward declared he never saw a man meet death more valiantly than the admiral. The soldiers were appointed at a certain signal to burst out instantly to the slaughter in all parts of the city. When they had killed the admiral, they threw him out at a window in the street, where his head was cut off, and sent to the Pope. The savage papists, still raging against him, cut off his arms and private members, and, after dragging him 3 days through the streets, hung him by the heels without the city. After him they slew many great and honorable persons who were Protestants, as Count Rochefoucauld, Tullianus, the admiral's son-in-law, Antonius, Clermontus, Marquis of Raleigh, Luz, Bussius, Brandinius, Publius, Bernaeus, etc. And falling upon the common people, they continued the slaughter for many days. In the 3 first they slew of all ranks and conditions to the number of 10,000. The bodies were thrown into the rivers, and blood ran through the streets with a strong current, and the river appeared presently like a stream of blood. So furious was their hellish rage that they slew all papists whom they suspected to be not very staunch to their diabolical religion. From Paris the destruction spread to all quarters of the realm. At Orleans 1,000 were slain of men, women, and children, and 6,000 at Rouen. At Meldeth 200 were put into prison and later brought out by eunuchs and cruelly murdered. At Lyons, 800 were massacred. Here children hanging about their parents, and parents affectionately embracing their children, were pleasant food for the swords and bloodthirsty minds of those who call themselves the Catholic Church. Here 300 were slain in the bishop's house, and the impious monks would suffer none to be buried. At Augustabana, on the people hearing of the massacre at Paris, they shut their gates that no Protestants might escape, and searching diligently for every individual of the Reformed Church, imprisoned and then barbarously murdered them. The same cruelty they practiced at Avarcum and Troyes, at Toulouse, Rouen, and many other places, running from city to city, towns and villages through the kingdom. As a corroboration of this horrid carnage, the following interesting narrative, written by a sensible and learned Roman Catholic, appears in this place, with peculiar propriety. The nuptials, says he, of the young King of Navarre with the French king's sister was solemnized with pomp, and all the endearments, all the assurances of friendship, all the oaths sacred among men, were profusely lavished by Catherine, the Queen Mother, and by the King, during which the rest of the court thought of nothing but festivities, plays, and masquerades. At last, at 12 o'clock at night, on the eve of St. Bartholomew, the signal was given. Immediately all the houses of the Protestants were forced open at once. Admiral Coligny, alarmed by the uproar, jumped out of bed, when a company of assassins rushed in his chamber. They were headed by one Besem, who had been bred up as a domestic in the family of the Guises. This wretch thrust his sword into the admiral's breast, and also cut him in the face. Besem was a German, and being afterwards taken by the Protestants, the Rochellers would have brought him in order to hang and quarter him, but he was killed by one Bretonville. Henry, the young Duke of Guise, who afterwards framed the Catholic League, and was murdered at Blois, standing at the door until the horrid butchery should be completed, called aloud, "Besem, is it done?" Immediately after this, the ruffians threw the body out of the window, and Coligny expired at Guise's feet. Count de Teligny also fell a sacrifice. He had married, about 10 months before, Coligny's daughter. His countenance was so engaging that the ruffians, when they advanced in order to kill him, were struck with compassion. But others, more barbarous, rushing forward, murdered him. In the meantime,
that's 1 hour and 19 minutes in to Fox's Book of Martyrs. And this is available for all of you to get grossed out on to your heart's content. And I just wanted to, there's quite a number of audiobooks I've been wanting to put up, like little 12-minute pieces of, so you can understand why I'm recommending these particular books from the past. So anyway, quit your belly aching. Goodness gracious. Oh no! I mean, I understand telling someone, hey, my account, Flying Axe Blade, got deleted from the tubes, and without explanation. But if you got an explanation, well, then you got your explanation. If you didn't get an explanation, well, you didn't get one, and you were murdered. Now, that's not what I wanted to say at all. What I want to say is, back up your channel. Hey, BitChute, by the way, start backing up my videos. I've asked you twice. But that's a pay-for service. And right now I'm eating out of my parents' garbage, so that might be a tad of a hassle for me to get that service up. They've been super wonderful. Can you give your dog coffee? It doesn't matter if you can or not, because he's going for it right now. Yeah. Woo! Yeah, I know, you're not going to sleep for hours. You'll be down there eating my garbage, aren't you? Aren't you? Yes, you are. But hey, you know, losing your YouTube channel is not the same thing for the amount of crying that's been going on as having your tongue ripped out. I mean, technically, there is an equivalency. However, technically, your tongue is still in your mouth, and you can make another channel. Oh my goodness, I gotta get another phone number. Oh my goodness, oh, it's so difficult. Or you can tame your tongue. And the other thing is what are you saying righteous? Because playing GTA you got me? I mean, I just want to trail off right there. You know, that's ellipses, ... Oh, I got a Bible stream. And then for the rest of the week, I play GTA. Well, and I don't know about Bible Hub. And I rely on a bunch of commentaries. And I really don't know the history of the Christian church or Protestants. I don't know a lick of Hebrew. I don't know where their cuneiform alphabet comes from. You know, and I don't expect you to know that. But we do have this thing called the interweb. And if you got 60 hours to play GTA in 1 week, you know, I used to work 6 months straight, every single day, 3 times a day. And I made a lot of videos, and that channel got annihilated without any explanation. But during those 6 years that I was on the internet, which is now, I've been on the internet for 10 years, not quite 10 years, 9 years, I guess. I dedicated myself to learning the Bible and learning Hebrew and finding out the truth about things. And I don't understand when an old duffer like me comes along and says, hey, you need to check out the Corvette Report. You need to check out Really Graceful. You need to. That, you know, these are small things. You really need to get on Bible Hub and look up what you're reading in the Hebrew and the Greek. You need to check out Nathan H83 and learn about the Septuagint over the Masoretic text to learn that the Jews have been messing with the Old Testament since 800 AD. This is 1,200, 1,200 years of messing with the Bible that we're aware of, that's documented. 1,200 years. You got 60 years of being awake on the earth right now. You know, like you turn 20, you know, your balls drop when you're 22, and you're aware. You're like, oh, wow, there's these things other than statism. You know, because you grow up and you're a statist. That's the way it works. Because you're completely reliant upon your parents, unless somehow you grow up when you're 12. I don't know how that works. I'm like, but you were required, pretty much for the most part, to grow up when you're 20 odd years old. I think that's why they have that 21-year-old rule. I don't know. 18-year-old rule. 15-year-old rule for the girls. That means, like, yeah, go ahead, play the game. But 60 hours a week of gaming because you're depressed? Unless you're making money, that seems really strange to me. Really strange to me. And I'm not exactly sure that I really want to be listening to you preach at me. Because that's some really awkward preaching all of a sudden. As opposed to someone like me, who's taken 9 years of internet studies in the Bible and lived for 30 years of doing it. I've lived longer than some of you people have been alive doing it. Doing the Christian life. And yes, I feel that you ought to take me seriously because I've been doing it. Also, hooray for the dog. The dog has really helped me out a lot. Isn't that right? That's right. Dog is now dead from drinking 1 tablespoon of coffee. But even I get like put down pretty hard, you know, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to videotape some of this Book of Martyrs stuff, was to remind you that your church might really be out to kill you. To kill you. And burn your bones. Because of what reason? You practice the gospel of Jesus. So, practice and preach, brothers. Practice and preach. And quit being whiners. Ugh. Quit being whiners.